David had always been a simple man. He lived in a small town where everyone knew each other, where neighbors still waved from their porches and where life moved at its own quiet pace. His little house sat at the edge of the road, surrounded by wildflowers and tall trees that swayed gently whenever the wind passed through. He spent most of his days in the small workshop beside his home, fixing engines, polishing tools, and listening to old songs that reminded him of better times. He wasn't rich, but he had enough. Enough to eat, enough to live, and enough to share when someone else needed a hand. But what made his life truly full wasn't money or possessions, it was his children. They weren't related by blood, but by something stronger. Years ago, he and his late wife had opened their hearts and their home to 3 children who had no one else in the world. He still remembered that day like it was yesterday. His wife had seen an ad about a small orphanage that was struggling to care for the children living there. When they visited, he had expected it to be just a short stop. But once he looked into those little faces, lonely, scared but still hopeful, he couldn't walk away. They adopted all 3, even when friends said it would be hard. Life wasn't easy after that, but it was beautiful. He worked long hours fixing cars and small machines just to make sure there was food on the table and warm clothes for everyone. His wife took care of the home, teaching the kids kindness and patience. They didn't have fancy toys or trips, but they had laughter echoing through the house every night. And that was more than enough for him. Years passed, and the children grew into adults. They moved away for work and started their own lives. But they never forgot the man who had given them a family when the world had turned its back on them. They called him every week, visited when they could, and sent little gifts during the holidays still. When the day ended and the house fell silent, David missed the sound of small feet running through the hallways. He missed hearing his wife's voice, soft and calm, telling him that everything would be all right. She had passed away a few years ago, and ever since then, the house had felt too quiet, too big. He found comfort in his workshop. There, surrounded by the scent of oil and old metal, he could lose himself for hours. Fixing something broken gave him a strange sense of peace. Every time he brought an old machine back to life, it reminded him of how life itself could be mended piece by piece, no matter how damaged it seemed. He had always loved cars, especially old ones. Not the shiny new models with fancy buttons and screens, but the ones built with steel and heart. To him, every scratch and dent told a story. Back in his younger days, he had owned a light blue 1965 car that he had bought when he was barely 20. It wasn't perfect, but it was his pride and joy. He spent years fixing it up, and that car had been there for many of his life's biggest moments. The first time he drove to the beach with his wife, the night they brought their children home, and the countless family trips filled with laughter and off-key singing. But when the family fell into hard times and money grew tight, he had to sell it. It broke his heart, but feeding his kids came before anything else. He never told the children how much it meant to him. He didn't want them to feel guilty. He just smiled, handed over the keys, and walked home quietly that day. Now, decades later, the memory still lingered. Sometimes when he worked on someone else's old car, he'd catch a glimpse of a blue shade that reminded him of his old one, and for a second it felt like he was back in that time again. One morning, as he was tightening a bolt under a customer's pickup, his phone buzzed. It was a message from one of his children, asking what he was doing that weekend. He smiled, wiped his hands on a rag, and replied that he had no big plans, just the usual. What he didn't know was that his 3 children were planning something behind his back. They had been talking for weeks, sharing ideas and saving up money. They wanted to do something special for their dad, something that would show how much they appreciated everything he had done for them. One evening, while scrolling through an online marketplace, one of them stumbled upon an old car for sale. It was in terrible condition. The paint was faded, the windows cracked, and the engine barely ran. But when they saw the model, they froze. It was a 1965 blue sedan, the same one their dad used to talk about every now and then. He had once mentioned it with a soft smile, saying, "That car had more heart than most people I've met." They knew right then what they wanted to do. They pooled their money together and contacted the seller. The man who owned it said it had been sitting in his barn for years. It didn't look like much, but they didn't care. To them, it was perfect. They arranged for it to be delivered straight to their father's house the following weekend. On the day of the surprise, David was sitting on his porch, sipping his morning tea. The sun had just started to rise, painting the sky in shades of gold. He saw a small cloud of dust forming at the end of the road and squinted, wondering who could be visiting so early. As the sound of an engine grew closer, his heart lifted when he recognized his children's car. They rarely managed to visit all together, so seeing them step out one by one filled him with joy. He stood up smiling as they walked toward him, but behind them a tow truck followed, carrying something that made him pause mid-step. On the back of that truck sat an old, rusted car. The paint was peeling, the tires flat, and the body dented in several places. Yet beneath all that, David could still see the familiar lines and shape of something he once knew well. He blinked, speechless, as the truck stopped in front of his yard. His children exchanged quick glances, barely able to hide their excitement. One of them said, "We got you something, Dad." He looked at the car again, then back at them, unsure whether to laugh or cry. "You bought this?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. They nodded. "It's not much right now, but we thought maybe you could bring it back to life." "Like you always do." David walked slowly toward the car. His hand brushed against the hood, and even through the rust and dirt, he felt a wave of memories rush over him. It wasn't just any old car, it was the same model, the same year, the same color as the one he had once owned. He took a deep breath, his eyes softening as he whispered, "It's beautiful." His children smiled, relieved. They had worried he might be upset, thinking it was too broken or too much work. But to him, it was more than a gift. It was a piece of his past returning home. That evening, they sat together on the porch as the sun went down. They laughed, shared stories, and made plans for how they would fix the car together. For the first time in years, the house felt alive again. Later, when everyone had gone inside, David stayed a little longer, looking at the car in the dim light. There was something oddly familiar about it beyond the model or color. A small dent near the right headlight caught his eye, the same spot where he had once accidentally hit a fence years ago. He frowned slightly. Could it be? He shook his head, smiling at his own thoughts. No, it couldn't be the same one. After all these years, that car could have ended up anywhere. Still, a strange warmth filled his heart as he looked at it. He whispered to himself, "You've got stories left in you, old friend." He turned off the porch light and went inside, unaware that the next time he'd open that car's door, his entire world was about to change. The next morning, the air was cool and filled with the sound of birds. The old car sat quietly in the driveway, its rusted body catching the first rays of sunlight. David stood there with a cup of coffee in his hand, staring at it like it was a long-lost friend who had come back after many years. His children were still asleep inside, tired from the long drive. But David couldn't wait. He set his cup down, rolled up his sleeves, and walked closer. The closer he got, the more details he noticed. The chipped blue paint, the missing mirror, the faint scratch marks near the trunk. It all felt too familiar. He opened the door carefully, and the sound of metal creaked through the quiet morning. The smell of old leather and dust filled the air, and for a moment he felt like he had stepped back in time. His hands ran along the steering wheel, tracing the worn edges. There was a small tear on the seat in the exact same place where he remembered dropping a screwdriver years ago. He sat inside and closed his eyes. It felt unreal. Could it really be the same car he once owned? No, that was impossible. He had sold it decades ago to a man from another town. What were the chances it had found its way back here? He brushed the thought aside. Maybe all cars from that model looked the same. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that fate was playing a quiet trick on him. When the kids woke up, they found him already halfway under the car, inspecting the engine. They laughed when they saw his legs sticking out from underneath. One of them called out, "You didn't even wait for us, did you?" David laughed back. "Couldn't help it. She was calling me." They spent the rest of the morning working together. The children helped clean the car, sweeping out the leaves and dust that had collected over the years. They washed it, scrubbed it, and even found some of the old chrome parts still shining underneath the dirt. Every time a bit of blue paint reappeared, David's eyes lit up like a child seeing something magical. When they took a break for lunch, they sat on the porch eating sandwiches, covered in grease and soap bubbles. The kids teased each other, laughing at who had done the worst cleaning job. For a few hours, it felt like time had stopped. The house was filled with warmth again, voices, laughter, the smell of food, and the sound of tools clinking in the background. As evening came, they talked about what needed to be done next. The car's engine needed new parts, the wiring was a mess, and the tires were too old to even hold air. It would take weeks, maybe months, to bring it back to life. But David didn't mind. The idea of restoring it gave him a sense of purpose again. He looked at his children and smiled softly. "You have no idea what this means to me," he said. One of them replied, "You've done more for us than we could ever repay. This is nothing compared to what you gave us." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, David stayed in the garage, sitting beside the car. He ran his fingers over the dashboard, brushing off dust. He noticed something strange, a small mark etched near the glove compartment. It was faint, but when he looked closer, he realized it was a tiny heart symbol scratched into the surface. His breath caught for a moment. He remembered doing that years ago with his wife. They had been driving home one evening when she jokingly took his pocket knife and carved a small heart into the dashboard. She said, "Now this car will always carry our love, no matter where it goes." David felt a lump rise in his throat. He leaned back in the seat, staring at that tiny mark. There was no doubt anymore, this was his car. The same one he had sold so many years ago. Somehow, after all this time, it had come back to him. He whispered quietly, "You found your way home." The next day, he told his children about it. They were stunned. "Are you sure, Dad?" One of them asked. He nodded. "Every scratch, every dent, I remember them all. This car has lived a life just like we have." They were amazed. None of them could believe that the same car their father once owned had ended up being sold to them by pure chance. It felt like destiny. They hugged him, and for a while no one said anything. The silence was filled with a strange kind of peace, like everything was exactly where it was meant to be. From that day forward, the car became more than a project. It became a bond between them. Every weekend the children visited, bringing spare parts and snacks, spending hours in the garage. The sound of laughter and the smell of oil filled the air again, just like the old days. David taught them how to replace spark plugs, how to sand down rust, and how to listen to the sound of an engine to know what it needed. They made mistakes, burned their fingers, and even broke a few tools, but they didn't care. The joy wasn't in finishing. It was in doing it together. One rainy afternoon, as thunder rolled in the distance, David sat inside the car while the kids packed up for the day. The rain tapped softly on the roof, and he found himself lost in thought. His eyes drifted to the rearview mirror, and he noticed something odd again. The mirror was slightly loose. When he tried to tighten it, he felt something behind the mount, a small hidden space. He reached up, pried the mirror base gently, and a tiny folded paper fell into his lap. It was yellowed and fragile, like it had been there for years. His heart started to race. What could it be? He carefully unfolded it. The handwriting was faded but still readable. It wasn't his nor his wife's. It read, "To whoever finds this, please take care of this car. It once belonged to someone very kind who helped me when I needed it most. If you ever find something hidden inside, it was meant for you." He stared at the paper, confused. Who wrote this? What was hidden inside? The kids came back into the garage just then. He quickly folded the paper and tucked it into his pocket, deciding not to mention it yet. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe just something left by a previous owner. But something deep inside told him it wasn't that simple. That night he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the note. Why would someone hide it in the mirror? And what did it mean? If you ever find something hidden inside. The next morning, after his children left for their own homes, he went back to the car. The sky was still gray from the rain, and the air smelled fresh. He started checking every corner of the car, the glove box, under the seats, the trunk. Dust flew everywhere as he searched carefully, hoping to find something that would explain the note. Hours passed, but he found nothing. He was about to give up when his hand brushed against something hard under the back seat. He lifted the cushion and found a small patch of metal that didn't quite match the rest. There was a tiny screw at the edge. His heart pounded as he unscrewed it slowly. Beneath the metal cover was a narrow space just big enough to fit a hand. Inside, wrapped in a piece of cloth, was an old envelope. He froze. For a moment he just stared at it, not sure whether to open it or call his children first. His fingers trembled as he pulled the cloth away. The envelope was yellowed and brittle, sealed with wax that had cracked with age. On the front, in neat handwriting, were the words, "For the man who gave love where there was none." David felt a shiver go down his spine. His breath grew heavy. Who was this message for? He sat quietly for several minutes, holding the envelope in his hands. Then he slowly broke the seal and opened it. Inside were old photographs and a folded letter. The photos showed a young woman and a baby wrapped in a blanket. There was something about the baby's face that made his chest tighten. He unfolded the letter carefully, his eyes scanning the first few lines. It began with, "To the kind man who once owned this car, if you are reading this, please know that you touched more lives than you realize." He stopped reading for a moment, his heart racing. The air around him felt still, heavy with something unexplainable. He looked back at the photo of the baby, and then at the letter again. A deep feeling settled in his chest, one that told him that what he was about to learn would change everything. He folded the letter gently, placed it back in the envelope, and sat in silence. The car that his children had brought him, the same car that had once carried his memories, was holding secrets of its own, and somehow, he knew, this was only the beginning of what it had to tell him. The rain had stopped by morning, but the air was still heavy and quiet. The car sat in the garage, shining faintly under the dim light, as if it too was waiting for David to finish what he had started. He sat on his old stool, holding the envelope he had found under the seat. He hadn't slept much the night before. The words on that letter had replayed in his mind again and again. He took a deep breath, opened the envelope once more, and began to read from the start. "To the kind man who once owned this car," the letter said, "you may not remember me, but years ago, you helped me in ways you never knew. This car once gave me a reason to believe in good people." David frowned slightly, his eyes narrowing as he tried to recall who it could be. The handwriting was neat, soft, the kind that looked like someone who cared deeply about what they wrote. He read on, "I was young and scared when I met you. My life was falling apart and I had no one to turn to. You fixed my car that day and refused to take any payment. You told me that some kindness shouldn't come with a price. I didn't forget those words. I carried them with me through every hard moment that followed." David's heart started to race. He couldn't remember every person he had helped over the years. There were so many. Travelers, students, single mothers, old farmers whose trucks had broken down. He never did it for money. He just couldn't stand seeing someone stranded. He kept reading. "You never knew, but I was pregnant at the time. I didn't tell you because I was afraid. My life was a mess and I didn't know how I would take care of a child. A few months later, I gave birth to a baby girl. It broke my heart, but I knew I couldn't raise her alone. I wanted her to have a better life. I left her in the care of people who promised she would be safe. I also left behind this car because it reminded me of that moment, the day a stranger showed me that kindness still existed." David paused, staring at the page. He felt a lump in his throat. He remembered helping a young woman once. She had come to his workshop in a panic because her car wouldn't start. She looked tired, frightened, and alone. He had stayed up half the night fixing it, refusing to take any payment. When she insisted, he told her to pass the kindness forward someday. That was decades ago. He turned the page of the letter and his hands trembled slightly. "I've hidden something inside this car. If you find it, it means you were meant to. Inside, there are photographs and documents that belong to my child. Her name was changed after adoption, but I kept these to remember her by. If you ever meet her, tell her I loved her more than she'll ever know." He sat frozen, staring at the letter. For a long time, he couldn't move. The only sound in the room was the ticking of the clock and the faint creak of the garage door in the wind. The realization hit him slowly, like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. His breath caught in his chest. Could it be possible that this woman's baby, the one she gave up, was connected to his family somehow? His mind raced. All 3 of his children had been adopted. Could one of them be that baby? He felt a chill run through him as he looked again at the photograph that came with the letter. The baby in the picture had soft, round cheeks and a tiny smile. He looked closer, his eyes moving from the photo to the memories in his mind. The shape of the eyes, the small curve of the mouth, it looked familiar. It looked like one of his children. David leaned back, his hands shaking slightly. He didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the thought refused to leave his head. He took another look at the documents folded inside the envelope. There was an old birth record, faded and half-torn. The mother's name was smudged, but the date of birth was still clear. He stared at it. The date matched one of his children's birth dates. He dropped the papers on the table and ran a hand over his face. His mind was spinning. He didn't know what to feel, shock, confusion, or something else entirely. He had always told his children that family wasn't about blood, but now the universe seemed to be weaving something he never expected. He stood up, pacing the room slowly. Every step echoed against the concrete floor. He thought about calling his children right away, but stopped himself. They deserved to hear this carefully. It wasn't something to just blurt out, so he waited. He waited until the weekend when they would all come home again. When the day arrived, the house filled once more with laughter and noise. They brought groceries, fresh bread, and stories from their week. But even as they joked around, they could see something was different about their father. He was quieter, more thoughtful than usual. After dinner, he asked them to sit down in the living room. They looked at him curiously. "What's going on, Dad?" one of them asked. He took a deep breath. "There's something I need to show you," he said softly. He walked into the garage and came back holding the old envelope. He placed it on the table in front of them. "I found this inside the car." They leaned forward, surprised. One of them asked, "What is it?" David hesitated for a moment, then began to explain everything. The hidden compartment, the note behind the mirror, the envelope under the seat, and the letter he had found inside. He told them how the woman who wrote it once met him long ago, how he had helped her without knowing what she was going through, and how she had left something in the car all those years ago. As he spoke, the room grew silent. His children listened carefully, their faces filled with a mix of surprise and disbelief. When he showed them the photograph of the baby, one of his daughters gasped softly. She picked it up and stared at it for a long time. Her hands trembled slightly. This looks like me," she whispered. David looked at her, his heart aching. "That's what I thought," he said quietly. She covered her mouth, trying to hold back tears. The others looked from her to the photo and then back to their father, unsure of what to say. He reached out and took her hand gently. "You were meant to be here," he said. "Your mother wanted you to have a good life, and somehow that car brought you back home to where you were always meant to be." She looked at him with watery eyes. "So the woman who wrote this, she was my birth mother?" He nodded slowly. "It seems that way." No one spoke for a while. The only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock on the wall. Then one of the other children said quietly, "That's incredible. After all these years, it found its way back to us." David smiled faintly, though his eyes were full of emotion. "It's almost like the car carried a piece of our story inside it, waiting for the right time to tell it." The rest of the evening passed in quiet reflection. They read the letter together, piece by piece, and every word seemed to connect something inside them that had been waiting to be understood. Later that night, David walked out to the garage again. The car gleamed softly under the overhead light. He placed his hand on the hood and whispered, "Thank you." The old car had been more than just metal and wheels. It had carried love, secrets, and destiny through time. Over the next few days, his daughter tried to learn more about her birth mother. She looked through the papers, the photographs, and the name signed at the end of the letter. They found a few old records, but much of it was faded and incomplete. Still, she said she felt at peace knowing the truth, that her birth mother had loved her, and that her father, the man who raised her, had been the one to unknowingly help that woman long ago. One evening, she hugged David tightly and said, "Maybe everything happens for a reason. Maybe that car came back to remind us that love never really gets lost." David smiled, holding her close. "You're right," he said softly. "Sometimes life brings things full circle in ways we could never imagine." He looked at the car one last time that night. The headlights caught the light from the porch, and for a second it almost looked alive. He smiled to himself, feeling something warm and peaceful settle inside his chest. It was strange how something broken and forgotten could return with so much meaning. He turned off the lights, closed the garage door, and whispered, "You've done your job, old friend," but deep down, he knew the story wasn't finished yet. There was still more the car had to reveal, something that would take their journey even further, and change how they saw their past forever. The days that followed were filled with quiet excitement and careful curiosity. David and his children spent long hours examining every detail of the old car, not just to restore it, but to understand the story it had carried for decades. The envelope, the letter, and the photographs were laid out on the garage workbench. Every time David looked at them, He felt a mixture of awe and wonder. Somehow something as simple as a car had carried messages across time, connecting lives in ways they had never imagined. His daughter, the one who had recognized herself in the photograph, spent hours staring at the tiny details of the documents. Names, dates, and handwritten notes formed a puzzle she was desperate to solve. "Dad," she said one evening, her voice soft but urgent, "we need to find out more about her." "About my birth mother? Maybe she left more than just this letter." David nodded slowly, understanding her need. He knew she had questions that had been buried deep for years, questions about who she was, where she came from, and why life had taken her the way it did. They began reaching out quietly, sending emails and making phone calls, trying to piece together what little information the letter had given them. Meanwhile, the children kept working on the car. Each bolt they tightened, each rusted part they replaced was more than just repair. It was like peeling back layers of time. They laughed together when things didn't fit, argued lightly when someone made a mistake, and shared stories from their childhood while grease and paint covered their hands. The garage had become their living room, their safe place, the bridge between past and present. One afternoon, David was under the hood checking the wiring, when he found another small envelope tucked behind the air filter. It was smaller than the first one and sealed with the same cracked wax. His hand shook as he carefully opened it. Inside was another photograph and a short note. "To the man who gave love where it was needed, I hope you find her well. She is safe and she is loved. Always know that the choices you made touched more lives than you realize." David felt a wave of emotion. It was like the universe itself was sending them confirmation that they were on the right path. He called his children to the garage and showed them the new photograph. They looked at it together, studying every detail. This is another piece of the puzzle," David said softly. "I think she wanted us to know that everything we do has meaning, that nothing gets lost." They decided to take the car to a local mechanic who specialized in vintage vehicles. While it had sentimental value, the car needed professional attention. The children insisted on going along. As they drove it slowly through the town, neighbors stopped to look. Some waved, others stared, but no one could imagine the story this old battered car carried inside. At the mechanic's garage, David and his children explained everything. The mechanic listened with wide eyes, nodding slowly. "It's rare," he said, "for a car to carry this much history. But I can see why it's important. We'll take care of it, make sure it's safe and ready to drive." While the car was being worked on, the family went through the photographs and letters again. They discovered small details they had missed before. Tiny marks on the photos, faint notes written in pencil, even a pressed flower tucked in one envelope. Each item told them more about the woman who had left them behind. They began to understand the depth of her love, the heartbreak she had endured, and the hope she had for her child. One evening, David sat alone in the garage, staring at the car. He thought about all the years he had lived, the children he had raised, and the choices he had made. His mind wandered to the moment he had helped that young woman long ago, the moment he had unknowingly changed a life. And now, decades later, that life had returned to him in a way he could never have imagined. His daughter came in quietly, standing beside him. "Dad," she said, her voice trembling slightly, Do you think she would have wanted me to meet her? To know her?" David looked at her, his eyes soft. "I think she left everything she could for you. I think she trusted that one day you'd know. And maybe it's time to learn more." They decided to reach out to the adoption agency. The paperwork was old, but the agency was able to confirm some details. The woman who had written the letter was indeed the biological mother. She had faced immense struggles, but she had always hoped that her child would have a life full of love. Reading the confirmation brought tears to David's eyes. It was as if all the pieces of a complicated puzzle had finally fallen into place. Over the next few weeks, they learned more about the woman's life. She had married, moved to another city, and had built a family of her own. Though she had never seen her daughter after the adoption, she had never stopped thinking about her. Every letter she left, every photograph tucked inside the car was a message of love, an invisible hand guiding them toward understanding and closure. David's children were deeply moved. They realized that their father's quiet acts of kindness had rippled through time in ways they could never have predicted. Not only had he given them a loving home, but he had also unknowingly created a connection between past and present that would remain in their lives forever. One sunny afternoon, as they worked together on the car, they found a small note hidden in the trunk. It read, "May this car always carry love wherever it goes." They laughed softly, realizing that the woman had placed these little messages intentionally. The car wasn't just a vehicle. It was a messenger, a silent witness to the way love could survive despite separation, hardship, and time. David leaned against the hood, looking at his children. "You see," he said, "this car didn't just bring back memories. It brought back a story we needed to understand. Life has a way of teaching us lessons in the most unexpected ways." His daughter nodded, holding the envelope tightly. "I think I understand now," she said. "It's not about finding what was lost, it's about realizing what was always meant to be found." The children spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning the car's interior, polishing the dashboard and fixing small details. Each movement was careful, deliberate, as if they were honoring the history of the car and the lives it had touched. Laughter and conversation filled the garage once more, the space alive with energy, love, and connection. As the sun began to set, David wiped his hands and looked at the car. It no longer looked broken or forgotten. It shone softly in the fading light, a testament to the journey it had taken and the lives it had influenced. He realized that this car had given him more than memories. It had given him perspective, understanding, and a profound sense of closure. That evening, as the family sat together, they talked about what the future might hold. They discussed meeting the woman, learning about her family, and finding ways to honor the story that had brought them all closer. Though there was still much they didn't know, they felt ready to embrace it together. David's heart felt full in a way he hadn't experienced in years. He looked at his children, saw the love in their eyes, and knew that everything he had done in life, the hard work, the sacrifices, the small acts of kindness, had led to this moment. It wasn't just the car that mattered. It was the connections it had strengthened and the stories it had preserved. That night he sat quietly in the garage looking at the car one last time. The letters, the photographs, and the notes were spread across the workbench. He touched each one gently, whispering words of gratitude. The car had brought them all together, reminded them of the power of love, and taught them that even when things seem broken, they can always be restored. He turned off the light, closed the garage door, and smiled softly. Tomorrow they would continue their journey, learning more about the past, celebrating the present, and building a future that honored every connection, every memory, and every act of love that had brought them here. The old car, once forgotten and broken, had become the heart of their family once again. It was more than a gift, it was a messenger, a keeper of secrets, and a symbol of the unbroken bond between a father and his children, a mother and her child, and the invisible threads that tie all of them together. And in that moment, David understood something he had always believed, but now could truly see. Love, when real, never fades. It finds a way back even through rust, dust, and years to remind us of what matters most. The weeks that followed were filled with a quiet, steady rhythm. David and his children spent nearly every weekend working on the car, turning what once looked like a rusty, forgotten vehicle into something alive again. It wasn't just about fixing an engine or repainting the body. It was about piecing together memories, mending the invisible threads that tied past and present, and honoring a story that had taken decades to unfold. Every bolt they tightened, every rusted panel they replaced, felt like a promise fulfilled. The garage was filled with laughter, gentle teasing, and the occasional sigh of frustration when a part wouldn't fit. Yet even those moments were sweet because they were shared together. For David, it was more than just a restoration. It was a way to relive his younger days, to feel the presence of his late wife in every movement, and to see the lives he had nurtured flourish in front of him. One bright morning, David's daughter, who had discovered the envelope from her birth mother, asked softly, "Dad, do you think she ever imagined this would happen?" David paused, wiping his hands on a rag. "I don't know," he said, "but I like to think she did. I like to think she hoped that somehow, everything she left behind would find its way back to where it belonged. And here it is." That day they decided to take the car for its first proper drive since it had arrived. The engine purred under David's touch, almost as if it were aware of the story it carried. The children climbed in carefully, helping each other adjust seats and mirrors, laughing as they remembered the countless times they had argued over small tasks in the garage. David started the engine slowly, The sound was familiar yet new. It was the voice of a machine that had survived decades, carrying secrets, memories, and love. The car rolled gently out of the driveway, and for the first time in years, David felt the wind on his face just as he had when he was young, when life was full of promise and possibility. As they drove through the small town, neighbors stopped and waved. Children on bicycles stared in awe, but none of them could know the significance of the moment for this family. To them, it was just a car. But to David and his children, it was a bridge between worlds, between the past and the present, between the love of a mother they had never met and the father who had raised them with every ounce of his heart. After a few blocks, David pulled over near the edge of a quiet park. The car stopped and he turned to his children, his eyes soft and thoughtful. "There's one more thing we need to do," he said. "We need to honor her." They followed him into the back seat, curious. David reached into the envelope, carefully taking out the letter and photographs. He handed them to his daughter, the one who had recognized herself in the photo. She held them gently, her hands trembling slightly. "Your birth mother," David said softly, "wanted you to know that you were loved, even when she couldn't be there, and now, we have a chance to honor her story, to complete it in some way, to make sure that the love she left behind is not forgotten." They found a small clearing by the edge of the park, surrounded by tall trees and wildflowers swaying in the breeze. The children laid the envelope carefully on the hood of the car. David knelt beside it, tracing the letters with his fingers as though reading them for the first time. He spoke softly, saying words of gratitude, of understanding, of hope. One by one, the children joined him. They read the letter aloud, each taking a part, their voices carrying across the quiet park. And as they read, it felt as if the words themselves were alive, wrapping them in a warmth that had been missing for decades. The photographs were held gently in their hands, the faces of the past looking back at them, smiling, approving, connecting them to the life they hadn't known but had always carried inside. When they finished, David looked at his children, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Some things," he said, "don't make sense at first. A car, a letter, a photograph, these are just objects. But the meaning behind them, that's life. That's love. That's family." His daughter smiled through tears. "It's strange, isn't it?" she said. "All these years we thought family was just us. But now, it feels like it's bigger than that. That love is bigger than we imagined." David nodded slowly. "It always has been. We just didn't see it until now." They spent the rest of the afternoon in the park, sitting together on the hood of the car, talking, laughing, and sharing stories. They imagined what life had been like for the woman who had written the letters, the struggles she had faced, and the love she had carried silently all those years. They realized that she had made the ultimate sacrifice, giving her child a chance at a better life, and that somehow, fate had brought everything full circle. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, David started the car once more. The children climbed in, and together they drove slowly back to their home, the engine humming like a heartbeat. On the driveway, David turned off the car and leaned back, closing his eyes. For a long moment, he just breathed in the evening air, feeling complete in a way he hadn't for years. He thought about the life he had lived, the choices he had made, and the way love had always found a way, even when it seemed impossible. His children watched him quietly. One of them broke the silence, saying, "Dad, we wanted to give you a gift." But it turns out, the gift was for all of us, for the whole family. David smiled faintly. "Yes," he said. "And sometimes the gift comes in ways we never expect." That night after dinner, they gathered in the living room, the car safely tucked in the garage. The letters and photographs were framed and placed on the mantel, a permanent reminder of the journey they had shared. They talked late into the evening, recalling moments from the past, reflecting on what they had learned and imagining the future. In the weeks that followed, the family continued to research the history of the woman who had left the letters. They learned more about her life, the challenges she had faced, and the family she had built after giving up her child. Though she had never met her daughter, they discovered that she had always kept her in her heart. Every action she took, every decision was guided by love. David's children felt a deep connection to her, even though she was a stranger. They understood the depth of her sacrifice and the courage it had taken to let go, knowing that her child would have a better life. And they understood something even more profound, that love, true love, doesn't end because of distance, separation, or time. It finds its way back in ways that are sometimes surprising, sometimes quiet, and sometimes as miraculous as a car returning home decades later. The restoration of the car was finally complete. The blue paint gleamed in the sunlight. The engine ran smoothly, and every detail reflected the care, effort, and love that had gone into it. But more than that, the car carried the weight of a story, of lives intertwined, of love given and received, of family that had been built on more than blood. When David drove the car one last time through the quiet streets of their town, his children beside him, he felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The wind rushed past them, the engine purred like a living thing, and for a moment it felt as if the past, present, and future were all together, in perfect harmony. As they returned home, David looked at the car one final time. It had started as a broken-down relic, a forgotten piece of metal, but now it was something far greater. It was a symbol of love, family, and the invisible threads that connect all of us. He turned to his children and said softly, "You see, life has a way of coming full circle. Sometimes what we think is lost isn't lost at all. It just finds its way back to us in the most unexpected forms." His children smiled, understanding exactly what he meant. The car had brought them together, revealed hidden truths, and reminded them that family wasn't just about shared history. It was about love, sacrifice, and the choices we make to care for one another. That night, they sat together in the living room, the letters and photographs framed on the mantel, the car resting in the garage like a quiet guardian of their memories. They knew that the story wasn't just about a car or a gift. It was about the journey of love, the impact of kindness, and the miraculous ways life could weave everything together. David looked around at his children, his heart full. He whispered softly, almost to himself, "Thank you for everything." And as the night settled in, the family understood that some things in life are meant to return, not to remind us of what was lost, but to show us the power of love, the strength of family, and the beauty of a journey that, no matter how long, always finds its way home. The old car, once broken and forgotten, had become more than metal and wheels. It had become a keeper of stories, a messenger of love, and a symbol of hope. And for David and his children, it would always remain a reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness can ripple through time, changing lives in ways no one could ever imagine. And so, with hearts full of gratitude, they closed the day knowing that love, real, enduring, unstoppable love, had returned to them in its purest form.